My name is Iris Callahan, and I am 18 years old. And at my own birthday party last night, my father tapped his glass and announced to 20 guests that our family had exciting plans for the future, looked directly at me, and said, "Right, sweetheart?" I said, "Thanks, Dad." What I did not say was that 8 hours earlier, at midnight, when the clock turned and the law recognized me as an adult, I had signed a set of documents on a video call with my grandparents' attorney that made the cabin at Cedar Lake irrevocably and permanently mine. What I did not say was that my Uncle Wade had spent the previous night printing a quit-claim deed for property he had never owned and submitting a purchase agreement to Ridgeline Development for $450,000. What I did not say was that Margaret Caldwell, my grandparents' attorney, was going to be the first person through the door at the county recorder's office when it opened at 8 o'clock this morning, carrying a certified copy of the Callahan Family Irrevocable Trust and a lis pendens notice that would freeze the title on the Cedar Lake property before my father and uncle arrived at 9. I smiled at my dad. I thanked everyone for coming. I cut the cake. To understand why none of this was accidental, you need to go back 6 years, to a summer when I was 12 and my grandfather picked me up in his truck and drove me 40 minutes to the cabin and handed me one end of a fence rail and said, "Grab the other end." We spent the morning replacing 3 rotted posts along the south side of the property. He showed me how to check for soft spots by pressing my thumb into the grain. If it gives, it is done. We worked until noon. My grandmother had sandwiches waiting on the kitchen table that my grandfather had built himself the year they got married. We sat on the porch and watched the lake until the light went gold. That evening, wiping sawdust off his hands, my grandfather said, "This cabin stays in the family. But family is not always blood, Iris. Family is whoever shows up." I was 12. I thought he was being poetic. He was not being poetic at all. He was already talking to Margaret Caldwell about exactly that piece of property and exactly me. I just did not know it yet. Back home, the conversations about the cabin had a different register than the conversations at the lake. My father, Greg, would bring it up at dinner in the voice he used when he had already made a decision and was narrating it rather than discussing it. "Property taxes are killing us," he would say. "We should reinvest." My mother would nod. "My grandfather said the cabin stays in the family," I said once. Greg laughed, not meanly, the way people laugh at something they have decided they do not need to take seriously. "You were 12, Iris." He was being nice. Nobody asked me anything else. The conversation moved to my sister Kelsey's debate trophy. I had won the district science fair 2 weeks earlier. The ribbon was still in my backpack. On the counter, half visible under a grocery list, was a glossy flyer. Ridgeline Development, lakefront lots, premium prices, now acquiring. A handwritten phone number in the margin that was not my father's handwriting. I put the flyer back exactly where I found it. My grandfather died when I was 14. At the reception after the funeral, I noticed Greg and his brother Wade standing near the dessert table, not eating, talking low. Wade had a folder tucked under his arm. I caught one sentence from across the room. "We should move on this before probate gets complicated." They were discussing the sale of my grandfather's cabin at his funeral reception. I was 14. I had no power and no voice and no understanding that my grandfather had already planned for exactly this conversation. 2 years later, my grandmother Vivian got sick in March and was gone by June. The last time I visited, she held my hand, and her grip was surprisingly firm, and she said, "The cabin is yours, Iris. Do not let them take it. Promise me." I promised. After her funeral, Greg sat at our kitchen table and said, "Now we can finally sort out the property." He said it the way people say things when something heavy has been lifted. That evening, Wade called and I heard Greg on the phone in the garage, pacing, his voice lighter than it had been in weeks. "Yeah, no, I agree. Let us get it moving." My grandmother's death was not a loss to them. It was a clearance. I did not cry that night. I made a different kind of decision, though I did not yet know how to act on it. Between 16 and 18, I went to the cabin every Saturday morning. I drove out in the used Honda I bought with babysitting money. I patched the porch screen. I replaced the weather stripping on the back door. I swept pine needles off the roof because my grandfather had taught me that was how leaks started. At home, the conversations were shifting. The cabin was no longer my grandfather's place. It had become the family property. Greg used this phrase like it had always been true. Wade showed up every other Sunday with manila folders. I tried once. What about what Grandma said? She wanted me to keep it. Denise put down her fork gently. Your grandma was emotional at the end, sweetheart. This is business. Business. That was the word they used for everything that used to be love. One November afternoon, alone at the cabin, I was clearing out the hall closet when I found a sealed envelope behind a stack of old quilts, my name on the front in my grandmother's handwriting. Inside, a single business card, Margaret Caldwell, attorney at law. Below her name, in small print, Callahan Family Trust. My grandmother had left it there knowing I would be the one cleaning the closet, not Greg, not Wade, me. 3 months before my 18th birthday, Margaret Caldwell called me. She said she had been my grandparents' attorney, and she needed to speak with me before my birthday, and that there was not much time. I met her the following Saturday. She was silver-haired with reading glasses on a chain. Her office smelled like old paper and coffee. She opened a folder and told me that my grandparents had established an irrevocable trust 6 years ago, containing the cabin, a savings account, and an investment portfolio, total value approximately $2.1 million, all of it held in the trust. I was the sole beneficiary. The title to the cabin had been recorded under the trust at the county recorder's office 6 years ago. My father did not know. The trust was structured so that it had never entered my grandparents' estate. It could not go through probate. Greg and Wade had no claim. She told me someone had been making inquiries at the county recorder's office about the cabin title within the last month. She told me to pay attention. I started paying attention. The next Sunday, Wade came to dinner. Afterward, he and Greg went to the garage and the door was open a crack. Wade's voice. I already signed the purchase agreement with Ridgelide, $450, but we need the title clean before closing. Greg, how do we get it clean? Quit claim deed. We're the legal heirs. We quit claim the property to ourselves. Record it, sell. Is that legal? Standard real estate transfer between heirs. Nobody's going to question it. A pause. Then, Greg, what about Iris? Wade's answer came fast. She's 17, Greg. She can't do anything. And by the time she's 18, the sale goes through. Done deal. She'll get over it. We'll give her a cut. 50 grand for college. She should be grateful. I stepped back from the garage door. My hands were cold. Wade had already signed a purchase agreement for a cabin he did not own, on land held in a trust he did not know existed. He had bet $450,000 on a piece of paper that had the wrong name on it. He just did not know it yet. I texted Margaret 2 words. They are accelerating. Her reply came in 3 minutes. I expected that. Come Saturday. We will prepare everything. 5 days before my birthday, my mother sat next to me on the couch and used the voice she had practiced. She said the cabin cost money to maintain. She said my father's business had been struggling. She said if they sold it, they could pay off debt and set up college funds for both me and Kelsey. I said, Grandma wanted me to keep it. Denise's expression shifted. Your grandma was very sentimental at the end, Iris. Sentiment doesn't pay property taxes. 3 days before my birthday, Wade caught me in the driveway. He leaned against his car and smiled and said the land alone was worth $450, and he could get a fast close with a buyer he trusted, and he could get me $50,000 for college. I said, whose name is on the deed, Uncle Wade? The smile froze just for a second. He said, your grandparents, but they are gone now. It passes to your dad and me as next of kin. That is not how it works, I said. I know it. He knows it. He sells houses. He was counting on me not knowing. The night before my birthday, I drove to the cabin alone. I parked in the gravel patch my grandfather had leveled himself. I sat in his chair on the porch. I opened my laptop. Margaret had sent the full document package. At midnight, I read each document twice. Then I closed the laptop and listened to the lake. My grandfather used to sit in this same chair and say, patience is not weakness, Iris. It is timing. I always thought he was talking about fishing. At 12:03, I signed the acceptance of successor beneficiary form. I was a legal adult. The trust was mine, and somewhere across town, my uncle's quitclaim deed was already a dead document. He just did not know it yet. At 8 o'clock, Margaret walked through the door of the county recorder's office carrying a certified copy of the Callahan Family Irrevocable Trust and a lis pendens notice. The clerk stamped it recorded. From that moment, anyone who pulled the title on the Cedar Lake cabin would see the trust recorded 6 years ago. My name, Margaret's name, the property frozen. At 9:05, Wade approached the counter with his quitclaim deed and his confident handshake. The clerk took the document, typed the parcel number, read the screen, typed again. She said, "I cannot record this document, sir. The property title is held under the Callahan Family Irrevocable Trust, recorded 2019. There is also a lis pendens filed this morning." Wade said, "That is impossible. My parents owned that property." The clerk said, "The deed was transferred to the trust 6 years ago. The chain of title is clear. I would recommend you speak with the trustee listed, a Margaret Caldwell." Wade's hand went flat on the counter. Margaret was sitting in the waiting area near the door. She did not say a word. My father called me at 9:22. I was on the porch watching a neighbor's sprinkler. He said, "What did you do?" I said, "I accepted what Grandpa and Grandma left me." He said, "You went behind our backs with some lawyer we have never heard of." I said, "Margaret Caldwell has been the trust attorney for 6 years. You just never asked." He said, "This is my parents' property. I am their son. They chose to leave it to me." I said, "Not because they did not love you, because they did not trust you with it." The silence that followed was the longest of my life. Then he said, "We will fight this." I said, "The trust is irrevocable. There is nothing to undo." He hung up. No goodbye. Ridgeline called an hour later, a man named Carter, brisk and corporate, already calculating his next move. He had a purchase agreement with my uncle. He needed clean title. I told him my uncle had never owned the property and he was free to pursue his remedies against him. Within the hour, Margaret confirmed to Ridgeline's legal team that the trust was valid. Wade had executed a purchase agreement based on a misrepresentation of ownership. Ridgeline pursued him immediately for the $45,000 penalty clause plus damages. Margaret called that afternoon with one more thing. The quitclaim deed Wade had tried to file included a notary stamp. The stamp did not match any registered notary in the county. It appeared to be forged. That was a felony. Wade settled with Ridgeline, paid the penalty out of a personal loan, lost his real estate license pending a criminal investigation, and discovered that assuming is not the same as verifying, and that a family cabin surrounded by white pines is not a simple transaction when the granddaughter spent 6 years showing up every Saturday to patch the screen door. In the desk drawer at the cabin, I found an envelope my grandfather had left for Margaret to give me after the trust was settled, one page in his handwriting. He said he knew his sons would try to sell the cabin. He said he did not blame them. Greg was his boy, and he loved him, but Greg had never understood the difference between something that has value and something that is valuable. He said he chose me, not because I was perfect, but because I was the one who asked whether the roof needed patching before I ever asked what the place was worth. The last line said, "Take care of it. It took care of you first." I enrolled in college that week, environmental science with a minor in forestry. Under current address on the housing form, I wrote the cabin's address for the first time. It felt like coming home, because it was. That is my story. Drop your city in the comments. Hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.